Where I hear that retailers are winning is around convenience, speed, digital experience, which is pulling some of the trade spend their way. Retailers are showing that if you get availability, speed, and a frictionless experience right, trade customers will respond and the growth numbers will reflect that. That said, merchants still have strong advantages in relationships, expertise, and service, but that's not to say that merchants can't get up to speed and look at ways of improving their process. The ones responding best are the ones investing in product data, faster processes, and stronger digital journeys, combining their traditional strengths with a more modern experience. A customer that's doing things well in this market is.
Hello, welcome to the Pimply Perspectives podcast. My name is Alex McConnell. Today we're looking at a major competitive shift in the building materials sector. Set the scene, in the last financial year, Kingfisher reported 1.5 billion in trade customer sales. That's excluding Screwfix. Trade sales reached 15% of group sales, rising to 17.9% in January of last year. And its TradePoint brand has 1.5 million active customers. Wix also reported strong growth of its TradePro brand, with sales up 10% and active members up 14% to 615,000. So it's clear that targeting trade business is no longer a small side play from traditionally consumer-focused retailers. These are now serious scale trade propositions. At the same time, this is happening in a market that already feels tough. So for example, Travis Perkins said 2024 revenue fell 4.7%, driven by weaker volumes, price deflation, and underperforming in merchanting. So the question is not just whether large retailers are growing in trade, it's what that growth means for traditional builders merchants in an already pressured market. And this feels like a conversation about more than price alone. It's also about convenience, availability, consistency, customer experience, digital expectations, and the product's information behind all of that. To help unpack all this, I'm joined by Alex Phipps, Construction Account Executive at Pimply. Alex works closely with businesses across the building materials sector, sees firsthand how supplier onboarding, product data, and customer experience all affect competitiveness. Alex, thanks for joining me. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Alex. Thanks for having me on today. Yeah, so like you mentioned, I'm Alex. I'm one of the account executives here at Pimply, but I very much focus on the wider building materials market as my vertical, have done for over 3 years now. So much of my time is spent speaking to organizations across the supply chain to understand challenges they're facing, product data or otherwise, and what's really limiting them from an operational efficiency and growth perspective. So great to be on this session today, sharing my insights.
And what are some of the businesses in this area that you've helped over the years, some of the brands?
Yeah, so some of the customers that I've worked with over the years include Wolseley and some of their subsidiaries such as Ideal Bathrooms and CP Hart. One of the large manufacturers that I work with was Ibstock Brick. Another one that's very prominent within the market are SIG. So very much experience across different sectors within wider building materials and also across the supply chain as well.
So to start with the bigger picture, there's a growing sense that trade-only builders merchants are no longer just competing with other merchants, but also with those larger retailers that I mentioned that have built these serious trade propositions. So are the merchants generally feeling that pressure from those retailers now?
I'd say there's definitely pressure. A lot of it's around shift rather than displacement. So where I find that and where I hear that retailers are winning is around convenience, speed, digital experience, which is pulling some of the trade spend their way. That said, merchants still have strong advantages in relationships, expertise, and service. I've got mates in the trade, and they'll often go to the same merchant, even if it's a bit of an inconvenience to them, travel times, because they've got their relationship with them. But from a digital perspective, this is where the large retailers are seeing an advantage because they have that ability to operate at scale. So, I'd say the real impact is on share of wallet and margin, not an overnight loss of core customers per se. The ones responding best are the ones investing in product data, faster processes, and stronger digital journeys, combining their traditional strengths, like I mentioned earlier, that relationship piece with a more modern experience, particularly in line with the younger tradespeople who are coming through now, who are more digitally aware than perhaps their previous counterparts.
Yeah, makes sense. So when you look across the sector, how much of a concern, where does that concern rank amongst other concerns? Is the market's under strain? Where does the growth of the larger retailers fit into the picture of the concerns for these merchants?
I would say it's definitely a factor. I can't say it's the number one primary concern. I'd say if you were to speak to anyone in this market, whether they're a merchant, whether they're a manufacturer, the biggest issue at the moment is the demand and volume decline across the market, which is coming up in all the conversations I have. Everybody's feeling the pinch of market pressures at the moment. Well, I guess what the growth of larger retailers does is amplify this pressure further. When volume's already down, losing even a small share of spend to more convenient digitally enabled competitors hits even harder for those customers. So, albeit perhaps not the root cause, it does add increased pressure.
Yeah. Speaking about, those kind of digitally aware brands, Wix, for example, ends 2025 with revenue up 5.9%, their Trade Pro brand sales up 8%, membership up 11%. They got plans. They just announced to open 17 new stores. And it feels like this has got to be driven by more than just price advantage alone. There was a LinkedIn comment by Steve Collins from Insight Retail Group arguing that it's really about execution and making the customer journey easier, like you said, like end to end. Is that now the bigger challenge for builders merchants, that the expectation from the customer is being set by those big retailers?
Yeah, so I'd say that's one of the biggest shifts. It's not just about price anymore, but as Steve Collins mentioned, I had a look through his post. Very interesting. It's all around execution and ease across the whole journey. So retailers are showing that if you get availability, speed, and a frictionless experience right, trade customers will respond and the growth numbers will reflect that. Some of the things that were highlighted in Wix's sort of proposition are around faster fulfillment, shorter lead times, simplified customer journeys, the 15-minute click and collect, the 3-hour delivery window. So it's no surprise really that they're seeing 5.9% year-on-year growth. And I guess this just raises the bar for the merchants. The real threat isn't just losing customers, it's the expectations are being reset. Tradespeople, like all of us, when you get used to that level of convenience, they start to expect it everywhere, very much akin to the Amazon model.
Yeah, it's good point. And looking at Grafton, they've grown revenue to 2.52 billion, like for like growth of only 1.7% though. So while Travis Perkins is reporting revenue down 4.7% in the tougher merchanting market, points to a real gap in execution, like you mentioned there, that difference. What are the better performers getting right in these difficult conditions? A Grafton, for example, and can product data be one of the practical levers that merchants can pull to strengthen their execution?
I'd say the better performers are winning on availability, speed, and consistency, making it easier for customers to find, trust, and buy what they need. Product data is a very practical lever in that if your data is clean, complete, easy to distribute, you can improve on product discoverability, speed of onboarding ranges, which is a particular challenge when you speak to merchants across the market. Also, accuracy of data across channels. Ultimately, it's all around improving the customer experience. In a flat or declining market, those small efficiencies really do compound. So it's not only a lever, but very much a foundational one for executing well at scale.
Yeah, makes sense. So looking at why these larger retailers are succeeding in trade now, what has enabled these traditionally B2C retailers to grow their trade offer so effectively? TradePoint has 1.5 million active members, trade counters in 200 stores. Like we said, it's not purely about pricing and lower margins. What are they getting right in terms of, brand, product information, search, customer experience? What are those specific things that they've focused on?
I would agree that it's definitely not just pricing. Of course, margin plays a role, but what's really enabled that growth is the execution at scale. So retailers are notoriously strong on brand trust and awareness, consistent structured product information, search and navigation that makes products easy to find, and a frictionless end-to-end experience. That combination makes it easy for trade customers to self-serve quickly, which is increasingly what they value. So pricing is a factor, but it's data experience and consistency that really helps to drive that repeat usage and growth as a business.
And do these retailers have an advantage because they're often set up to deliver the more standardized experience across, branches, digital channels, trade services, whereas many merchants are still dealing with fragmented supplier data and inconsistent product structures? So have you had any conversations like that with merchants that this is something they struggle with?
Yeah, so I'd say that's a part of it. And many merchants are still dealing with this fragmented supply data, inconsistent structures, which ultimately is going to make it harder to scale at the same level of consistency. It's not a gap that can't be bridged, though, I would say. But what it does mean is that retailers can move fast at the moment and provide a smoother experience to their customers, which is, as we've discussed, what the trade customers are expecting. But that's not to say that, like I mentioned earlier, merchants can't get up to speed and look at ways of improving their process, bringing in systems to help streamline their go-to-market product processes.
Moving into talking a bit more about that product information, how much of the issues around this come back to supplier onboarding? If you're taking data from hundreds or thousands of manufacturers in different formats, that becomes a real operational challenge, doesn't it? Has that held merchants back? Is that something that specific merchants talk to you about?
Absolutely. I'd say the number one theme of the conversations that I have with merchants, no matter whether they are typical builders merchants that sell like a very generic broad range, whether it's specialist merchants, for example, plumbing, heating merchants, supplier data for them is always one of the highest ranking challenges that they face. Obviously, we've seen the data yard initiative, which is coming into the fold because it's such a prominent issue. And it always does come back to supply data, particularly if you're taking these feeds in from a large number of suppliers, particularly when you're pulling it in from hundreds of manufacturers who have all different formats, standards. It becomes a major operational challenge for these businesses and therefore requires lots of manual rework to get it ready for your own sales channels.
Is that where maybe the larger brands have a bit of an advantage? 'Cause, manufacturers and distributors often talk about the power dynamic that large retailers can create, especially dictating how product information is submitted, structured, maintained. What does that mean for the builders merchants trying to compete when large operators have the scale to be able to sort of set the rules?
Yeah, absolutely. Large retailers can dictate standards because they have the scale and that drives the consistency and efficiency on their side. I guess for merchants, the opportunity to take back control of their own data standards rather than just relying on what the suppliers provide will be key for them to really catch up in this space, which is what we're seeing a lot of organizations do when they take it into their own hand, have systems such as PIM to really help with that onboarding piece. I think the validation is key, moving away from people manually checking product data and having that manual communication back and forth with the suppliers, which ultimately is slowing down product time to market and enabling retailers to get that competitive advantage because their products are fully enriched live on their channels, whereas merchants are still getting the data up to speed. So I think it's all around setting clear requirements and normalizing the supply data.
Yeah. In building materials, especially, product information is rarely simple. There are technical attributes, compliance considerations, sustainability details, application guidance, substitutions, related products, cross sells, all this kind of stuff. Does that complexity create a bigger opportunity for the merchants that can get that right?
Yes, I would say that complexity is definitely an opportunity because inherently the harder the product data is to manage, the more value there is in getting it right. So if a merchant is able to structure and therefore surface the information to customers clearly from technical specs, compliance, whatever it may be, and make it far easier for the customer to find the products, it also gives them the confidence as a customer to purchase from the merchant because they trust from the company that they're buying from. So I would say that it can become a real differentiator, getting complex product data right.
Okay, so let's think about how these merchants could maybe claw back some of that market share. If you're a builder's merchant looking at this trend, how should you respond to this? How do you avoid being squeezed between the larger retail groups and other merchants without competing on price and those margins? Where can you create an advantage through product information, for example, customer experience, and the genuine, trade expertise that they each have?
I think it's to compete and experience and expertise in the market. So there's ways in which merchants can create an advantage by making complex product information clear, structured, and easy to use for customers, helping customers to choose the right product first time, enabling faster, more reliable ordering across channels, and combining that with real trade knowledge and service. When I speak to merchants, it's often around ensuring that they get the repeat custom from their customers. They're not, from my experience, as interested where the transactions come from, whether it's in branch or online. But it's very much about ensuring that they are seen to be convenient and they have that strong relationship, which encourages that repeat custom. So I'd say focusing on experience both online and offline is really key in this area.
If you were advising a merchant leadership team today, what would be the first thing that you'd tell them to fix or prioritize?
So I'd look at the foundations. One of the key ones that comes up all the time, of course, is product data and getting this under control. If your data is fragmented, if it's inconsistent, everything else suffers. Whether it's customer experience, digital performance, internal efficiency, even branch operations are coming into this conversation more and more. The ability to surface this information to workers within the branch. Merchants that fix this can then move faster, onboarding products quicker, improving availability, delivering a more consistent experience across every channel. It might not be the most visible change, but actually it's something that unlocks everything else, both online and offline.
Cool. Just want to throw like a bit of a curveball, I suppose. Like thinking about the brands that we've worked with, are there any sort of good examples you could think of these merchants that have kind of put themselves in a good position to be competitive in this area through how they've approached their product data, do you think?
Absolutely. One that always springs to mind about a customer that's doing things well in this market is City Plumbing. So City Plumbing have been a Pimbley customer now for a number of years. And where they've really seen operational efficiency is from leveraging the vendor portal. We touched on supplier onboarding quite a few times during this podcast, and that's enabled them to see real efficiency gains, moving away from people in the business manually checking product information, letting the tool validate data for them. That's enabled them to see data completeness improve by over 25% since implementation. Web ready SKUs increased by 7.5%, and live on web data quality improved by 10%. They were key metrics that they've given to us, and they even have Pimbley's vendor portal link on their website. It's very much key for them to ensure that they are getting products into the business and listed online quickly as possible, and ensuring data quality throughout. Very much, again, leaning into that area we discussed around having a best-in-class digital experience.
Brilliant. Yeah. Good real life example of leading from that data coming in and being the foundation, like you said. Great. Okay. Well, thanks very much for your insights there, Alex. Thanks for joining me on this podcast.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah. And join us next time for more insights on the Pimbley Perspectives podcast.